Welcome back to Shifting Lanes. My name is Hanson and I'm standing right in front of the 2023 BMW X1 xDrive 28i. This is BMW's smallest and cheapest crossover, starting at just under $39,000. And for the 2023 model year, it has been redesigned inside and out. And powering this thing is a potent 2-liter turbo, which makes this an ideal city type of car if it didn't totally suck at doing these two things. And hint, it has something to do with low speed situations. And I'll talk more about that at the end of the video. But let's kick things off with the outside first. This tester that I have for the week is the xDrive 28i model, and it comes in the awesome San Remo green metallic premium paint, and it also has the $4,200 premium package, which gets you heated steering wheel, auto dimming mirrors, heated front seats, 3D surround view, and a bunch more to list. All in with destination, you can get this for $46,795. Now, looking at the exterior, this looks like a BMW X5, but if you applied a 90% scale factor to it, it looks big from a distance, but once you park next to another SUV or walk up close, you really notice its subcompact stature. And once you jump inside, you really feel it there too. Now, for 2023, the BMW X1 gets a very subtle facelift. If you look at the headlights, these are now much more simple compared to the previous generation, and the BMW kidney grills, they got bigger. Surprise, surprise, the BMW likes their large kidney grills. And this one has one trick behind it. This has active grille shutter, so similar to what you'd find in EVs. Basically, this will stay closed when you first start the engine so that it'll warm up the car a little bit faster, and this will open up later on to provide more airflow to the engine bay. All of these aerodynamic changes makes the front end of this BMW X1 much more slippery. So it has a coefficient of drag of 0.27. That's very good for these type of cars. And as for the rest of the front bumper, it has been restyled to give it a cleaner and less busy look compared to last year's model. The sheet metal on the side has received a slight revision as well. You can see the revised character lines on the side. And for this xDrive 28i model, it still has the black cladding on the side here, although this is a gloss colored, which looks pretty nice. But if you want to get color matched wheel arches, you have to go with the M35i. Of course, that's more expensive and has more power. And I like small details like the silver metallic mirror caps here, because this makes it look like it's some sort of a special edition. And if you look on the side, you have these flush door handles, and this will improve aerodynamic efficiency. And as for the back end, this has these slimmer LED taillights, and there's also a restyled hatch with a slightly different spoiler, and it looks more sporty than the previous generation. And for the xDrive 28i trim, there's a lack of tailpipes back here. So overall, I can't really dislike the X1 styling. It is an attractive design that has big X5 vibes. Only when you walk up close to it do you really realize how small it is, and once you step inside as well. So let's go do that. Inside, this BMW X1 has a pretty major revision. It now looks just like any other modern BMW interiors. It has this single panel with the two screens. There's a new steering wheel design and also new center console. Notice anything different here? There's no iDrive dial in the center console, so this is a lot smaller than what it could have been. There's also a new door card design and new seats. And I think these seats are just okay. There's a couple of motorized adjustments, so you can adjust the backrest in the forwards and backwards. And also you can extend the leg support here. But there's two downsides. If you're a fairly large person, these thick bolsters here, which will normally support you for those side-to-side motions, these might be a little bit too form-fitting for you. And also, there's no lumbar adjustment here. So this is obviously a younger person's car with no back problems. So if you need more back lumbar support adjustments, then you might want to consider other cars. We could open up this big sunroof to allow more light in, and here you could see the general size of this car. The space has slightly increased compared to the previous generation because this vehicle has a longer wheelbase and also a wider track, and that's what's felt inside here. Now, you can technically fit 5 people in here, though the second row is going to be slightly crowded, just judging by how much space here you have between the two front seats here. There's not a lot of space between the shoulders. Jumping into the second row, there's decent legroom here at 37 inches. Let's jump in. I have a little bit of room, and headroom for the second row is fairly decent at 39.3 inches. I'm 5'8", and there's plenty of headroom for me here. Comfort-wise, I do have some vents here and a couple of USB-C ports, and I could fold down this armrest, and that exposes the cup holders. But besides that, there's really no other amenities for the second row occupants. As for cargo space, the hatch is motorized, so you could just let that open. And there's a good 25.6 cubic feet of storage behind the second row. And underneath, you also have a spare tire. You can get more room in the cargo space if you fold these seats down. These are 40-20-40 split design, but the only downside is you have to do it from the second row. So you pull this and then it'll just fold down like that. So with the second row folded down, the space grows to 46.9 cubic feet. So not bad for a small crossover. So interior wise, yes, this is going to be a fairly small car. This is a subcompact crossover, and this is what you get in the class. It's going to be cramped. It'll be ideal for a one-person type of car, but once you add a second person, a third, fourth, and possibly a fifth, you're going to find that this is a very small car to serve that purpose. And other small things that I find kind of annoying with small cars is that there's not a lot of foot room here, so that my left foot is always just feeling a bit cramped. And also it feels like you're sitting in a tub here, so that when you're stepping out, it feels like my left foot is always tripping against this portion of the car. Now let's talk about the technology, and I really like this curved panel design. This is on the new BMW designs. You'll find this in the BMW iX, the M2, the 3 Series. It's everywhere. The infotainment system is entirely touchscreen. You do have a volume dial down here, and I'll talk more about that later, but all of this is just a touchscreen, and you have these buttons that will disappear depending on which screen that you're in. And this is the new standard BMW infotainment system, so you can customize these screens to your liking. There's a fancy looking clock that just says the time. It's very weird, not very easy to read, but whatever you don't like, you could just remove, and then you could reorder certain things to however you see fit. I do like that the bottom portion of the screen is reserved just for climate controls, and it's always there regardless of what screen that you're on. But if you want to turn on features like the heated seats and also the heated steering wheel, you have to go through a couple of button pushes. There is an automatic program that will turn on as necessary, and I like to keep that on. I do like the features in this infotainment system. There are a lot of apps. There's infotainment apps and vehicle apps, and there's a lot to sort through. And I like the interior lighting in here. You could just change the cockpit brightness, and you can also change the ambient lighting. So it's nice that you could customize the car just to your liking this way. There are pretty dramatic lighting effects on the outside too. There's high beams that gradually turn on, and there's also puddle lights for this car and blinkers that pulsate. The way these blinkers turn on and off, it's kind of different. And two other features that I like in this car are the augmented reality. So if you have navigation plugged into here, a screen will pop up that shows the forward-facing camera, and it will overlay some arrows to show you which streets you actually need to turn on. So that's a nice helpful feature, and you can find that in other BMWs as well. I also like this 360-degree camera view, and you could just pull that up, and very easy, you could see all around you. I like the wireless charger in here, and this is just like any other wireless charger, but it has a bonus. It has this roller coaster type bar here that will keep your phone secured. So when you put your phone into here and you just set that bar against it, and that will stay secured for the rest of your drive. I like that. And lastly, we can't forget about the extra screens here. You have your digital instrument cluster, and you could change the type of content that you're going to see, and also changing the different layout. And what I like about this is that it's very clean, very simple, very modern looking, and there's also a way to change the heads-up display. There's a fairly decently sized heads-up display, and you can only toggle between the standard view and the sport view. Speaking of sport views, there are different modes in this car, and to change the modes, you click on the My Modes button, and then there's personal, sport, efficient, expressive, and digital art. Personal is your default type of driving. Sport kind of amps things up a little bit. Your throttle response becomes more responsive, and then also the steering gets a little bit heavier. And in efficient, this changes the climate control and also visibility function. So this will actually improve your miles per gallon somewhat, because you are using less power in other driving aspects, like the climate control and also other things that draw power. And then if you go into expressive, this is really just changing the visualization and lighting events. So there's really nothing too interesting with this one aside from this making it more expressive. And then lastly, you have digital art. Again, this just changes kind of the lighting and the background effects of what you see. So really the two most important ones are personal and sport. And I'll talk more about this in the driving section because this has some pretty important implications in how the car drives in general. As for the rest of the interior, this has a very minimal look to it, except for the very large vents for the center and two for the passenger side here. It seems a bit excessive, but it kind of streamlines the look of the car. Very few buttons here, just your max front defroster and rear defroster. And then down below you have your wireless charger, two cup holders, two USB-C ports, and then here you have your center console. So yeah, no more iDrive dial here, you just have your volume dial over here. Here you have your hazard button, your 360-degree camera view, your start-stop button, and this is your gear lever. Note that there's no park button on here. You could only go into reverse, neutral, drive, and low gear, and also your parking brake button, so that when you're driving and you want to get into park, this is a dual clutch transmission, so there's really no parking gear. So if you want to put yourself into park, you either just engage the parking brake button or just stop the engine altogether. And then down here you have your My Modes button. This button here is for your driving settings, so you could control your driver assistance and also drivetrain and chassis settings. And then back here, this is your auto hold button, so that when you're coming to a stop, you don't have to press on the brake all the time. And then over here, you have your volume dial and also seek buttons. And here is how you open the very small armrest, so you can't really store anything down here, but there's a fairly generous open concept storage down below. Now let's talk about the driving experience, and let's first start with the engine. This thing comes with a 2-liter turbo engine making 241 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque. This one has a single turbo design. They call it the twin scroll turbo, which means that it has like multiple vanes in the turbo housing so that turbo lag is minimized. And that turbo gives this engine a pretty meaningful punch, making the small crossover feel pretty mighty for its size. 0 to 60 can be done in under 6 seconds, and I think that's great for a subcompact. Gas mileage is also not bad. BMW rated it at 25 city, 34 highway, and 28 miles per gallon combined. I'll be happy if I can get close to 30 miles per gallon for a 2-liter turbo in general. The first big issue I have with this car is the 7-speed dual clutch transmission. So previously they had an 8-speed automatic gearbox, so that's your traditional torque converter unit. Now I've had previous experience with 7-speed dual clutch gearboxes before. I have a 2017 Hyundai Tucson that comes with that similar design. Now they're totally not the same cars, but mechanically speaking, the transmission somewhat works the same way. Dual clutches have an odd and even clutch, and they switch on and off depending on whether you're on the odd gears or the even gears. The shifting is lightning fast. That's the benefit of dual clutches. They are the fastest transmissions out there available in the market right now. The problem comes with low speed situations because basically dual clutches behave somewhat like a manual transmission. It just takes time to engage and disengage the clutches. The faster the clutch take up, the more wear and heat is introduced into the transmission unit, and the less comfortable that transition becomes. So the engineers have to find the right balance for good performance and longevity. Dual clutches also have less parasitic losses compared to the normal torque converter versions, and that's probably why they went to this 7-speed dual clutch unit, so that they could have better efficiency and increase that gas mileage. So what does it feel like to drive with this 7-speed gearbox? It feels disconnected. When you're at a stop sign and you decide to accelerate, there's a little bit of lag before you start going, and that could feel pretty annoying, especially if you're trying to pull out into traffic and there's a car coming and you feel like you're going to accelerate away, but there's just that little bit of delay before the transmission engages. The second big issue I have with this car is the auto start stop system. Now, I never really like auto start stop systems anywhere. I find that it's a bit annoying, and I'm curious whether it's going to have detrimental effects on the starter in the long run. The only time I do like auto start-stop systems is in hybrids because they don't have a starter, they have a motor generator, and it's all inherent to how a hybrid functions. And the way it turns on and off, it's also very smooth. You can't really tell when it's turning on. In this car, that low-speed hesitation problem is almost compounded with the presence of auto start-stop systems. Both of these things add to a very non-smooth transition from a dead stop to getting going. And remember that punchy engine that is great for accelerating? Well, it doesn't feel very good when you're moving from a stop. It feels all or nothing, and it might be okay if you're just driving by yourself because you'll get used to it. But when you have other passengers in the car and also their added weight, it changes the driving dynamics a little bit, and it's not going to be very smooth. They might just think that you're a horrible driver. And you can't easily turn on and off that auto start stop feature. Now, normally in other cars, it's a simple button somewhere in the center console, but in this car, it's attached to the driving mode. So in personal mode, it is always on. You cannot turn it off. The only way to turn it off is to go into sport mode. Great, but that introduces other problems as well because the default sport mode, it changes the throttle response in the engine. And that's what you'd want when you're driving in a sporting fashion anyway. You want immediate response in the steering and also in the throttle inputs. So the real solution is to customize sport mode so that you tone down those other settings like the drivetrain and also the steering. I almost prefer another driving mode, but you cannot add driving modes in here. You have these predefined settings. You just have to go into sport and then change those specific ones. Now, both of these issues make me not ever want to drive this car. I mean, when pulling out into a main road, yes, you'll have a pretty powerful engine to accelerate, but waiting for the engine to turn on and then the transmission to engage feels relatively like an eternity. And another small problem that I don't like is the lack of paddle shifters in this car. Now, I understand that paddle shifters is more of a premium type of feature, but considering that this is a dual clutch transmission, this is the one time where you have a manual like automatic transmission and you'd want to play around with the gears so that you could really feel more engaged in the act of driving. Normally, if there's no paddle shifters, but there's a gear shifter where I could toggle the gears, that would be sufficient. But in this case, I can't even manually change the gears. This only has a drive and a low gear, and I can't toggle between the different speeds. Now, as for the rest of the driving experience in the X1, the ride quality is what you'd expect from a car of this size. Road and wind noise is handled well, but the ride can be a bit stiff and jarring depending on the road surface. Handling of the X1 is also pretty good, and I think the steering input is quite nice as well. Driving through the back roads, this car feels very agile and very fun to drive. And again, that potent 241 horsepower engine, that's appropriate for this size car. But when it comes to braking the X1, this is where I kind of have an issue with it because the feel is slightly different compared to other cars. You could just push, 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 and push, and it feels linear, but then at a certain point, the bite is super strong, again, leading to a not very smooth driving experience. But in general, combine the small footprint of the car, the powerful engine, and this becomes an appealing city dweller type of car. So, summing up, all of the features and new interior design make the BMW X1 a really nice car and an awesome entry-level BMW crossover. However, I can't get past the transmission, the lack of paddle shifters, and the ridiculous auto start-stop. So that's the 2023 BMW X1. I want to thank you so much for watching all the way till the end. If you've learned something from this video, please consider hitting that like, subscribe, and that notification bell so that you can be notified the next time I make a new video. Let's wrap it up right there. My name is Hanson, and this has been the 2023 BMW X1 xDrive 28i, and I'll see you in the next one.